So a year ago, Kay was making Valentines cupcakes and for my 5-year-old granddaughter. And she was mixing the batter, and the granddaughter is standing right beside her looking at every little move she made. And she said, "Nana, are you going to put in the TLC?" She said, "Yes, I am." She said, "What is the TLC?" She says, "Tender, loving care." And she said, "Nana, make sure you put in the love." You know, when I look at the recipes that I make for life and the way I live my life, so many times I have good intentions to put in the love, but I don't do it. Jesus knows that we forget to put in the love. And this great Sermon on the Mount is all about putting in the love, going the extra mile, turning the other cheek, loving those who may not even love you, doing good and helping other people. I was looking intently at the Scout Law because it's Scout Sunday today, and there's one value that's missing from the Scout Law, but it's inferred there, and it's the value of love. The Scout Law says this: a scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. Where's the word love? Well, if you think about it, it's all in there. You could say that without love for God and neighbor, these values of the Scout Law are vapid and empty. But you could also say that if you say you love God and neighbor, these values flesh out what that means to love God and to love your neighbor. For how can you love God without being reverent and obedient? And how can you love your neighbor without being helpful, courteous, and kind? In this passage that we just read about the commandments and how Jesus interpreted the commandments from the Old Testament, there is a lot of love in there. And it's important for us to see how he interpreted these commandments. Love is not merely abstaining from hate and abstaining from messing up. Love has a positive side to it. If a man never messes up, I've yet to see a man who's never messes up, but if a man never messes up, never makes a mistake, always does the right thing, but he never tells his wife, "I love you," he never hugs her, never goes the extra mile of sacrifice for her, she's going to wonder, does he really love me or not? Love always has a positive side. On the other hand, there are those who easily say, "I love you." And they're very romantic, but they're also very shallow, and they don't mean it from their heart. It's easy to say something and not live it. You really need both. You need three things. You need your actions to match your words, to match your heart. And Jesus is really saying that's how you interpret the commandments from the Old Testament. You need three things. There's the command, there's the interpretation from the heart, and then there's a positive side to it. And for example, Jesus said we need to avoid murder. Do not murder. He affirmed that in the Sermon on the Mount. But he also adds to that, in addition, don't be angry with your brother or sister. Don't be cutting towards your brother or sister. That's also breaking this terrible commandment. But he didn't just stop there. He added a third dimension, and that is don't just not shoot somebody, Don't just not be angry in your heart, but the positive side is to love. Turn the other cheek. Love your enemy. Love your neighbor as yourself. These are the opposite of the command not to murder. You're not only called not to murder, you're called to do good, to love in his name. Another example is the commandment about adultery. We need to avoid adultery, which is sex outside of marriage. But adultery starts in the heart. Do not allow lust, Jesus said, to control your life. Do not allow yourself to treat other people like meat or like things to satisfy your lust. Instead of lust, the positive side of that is to replace it with love. True and healthy sexuality is not the fulfillment of lust, but the fulfillment of love in a committed relationship. Jesus was also concerned about reconciliation. And when he talks about love, that's really important. Love is not just something that you say. It also means making an effort to reconcile with other people and to reconcile with God. Jesus asks if you are reconciled to one another, and asks that if you are there coming to worship and you remember, I've got something against somebody, or somebody has something against me, he said, leave your gift at the altar. Leave your gift there and go and be reconciled to your brother. If you know somebody has something against you, leave your gift and go. So today, when the ushers come to take up the offering plate, I'm going to say, anybody who has any grudges at all, go ahead and leave the saint. I'm not going to say that. I think we'd all be gone, maybe. But Jesus, you hear Jesus' point. It's a part of our worship. It's even more important than just saying, I love God. If you don't love your neighbor whom you see, how can you say, I love God whom you do not see? We're called to get rid of our grudges, to be reconciled with each other. So this, in Matthew 5, it says that if somebody has something against you, it's your responsibility to go out and make peace with them. There's another verse in Matthew 18 that says this: if your brother sins against you, go and show him his fault just between the two of you. And if he listens, you have won your brother over. But if you will not listen, take one or two others along. And his point is, if someone sins against you, it's up to you to reconcile with them. Do you see what Jesus is saying here? If you add both those passages together, it's not up to the other person to come to you. It's up to you to go to them. Reconciliation is a very, very important part of love, of loving your neighbor. Getting rid of the grudge in your heart frees you and helps you to live in peace with God and with neighbor. I remember talking to a young couple years ago in church, and this has affected how I counsel people who are about to get married. This young couple came to my office, and they said they loved each other very much, but they had a very hard time getting along with each other. And I said, well, tell me what, surprise, surprise. So I said, well, tell me what's happening. She said, well, every time he gets mad, he has to walk off. And sometimes he even slams the door and is there by himself. I said, well, how do you want to handle when you're angry? She said, I've got to talk it out. I just got to get it behind me and talk it out. So, okay, you got two different ways of handling anger. He wants to be by himself, away, and you want to just be right there in his face and get it all out. I said, it's not that one is wrong, the other, maybe slamming the door could be wrong, But, you need to kind of find a way to listen to each other, compromise together, and realize that maybe to the guy, you need to be a little more careful about being by yourself, not forever, but just for a few minutes, and then coming back to her, and you need to allow him space. To live a life of love means that you have to give a little bit, go the extra mile, turn the other cheek, listen to what the other person is doing and how they handle things, and care for them even more than you care for yourself. Remember 1 Corinthians 13, great passage. And 1 Corinthians 13, you just hear the Sermon on the Mount in 1 Corinthians 13. So I wanted to read it. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. Love is not proud. Love is not rude. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Doesn't that sound like the Sermon on the Mount? Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. If you want to have meaning in your life, if you want to have purpose in your life, it's found in love. Loving God, loving neighbor, and loving those that God has placed along your path. Jesus said it, greater love has no one than this, that he lays down his life for his friends. And he said that right before he laid down his life for us. Jesus didn't just talk about turning the other cheek. He lived it. He gave himself for us on the cross. 1 John said it like this, herein is love, not that we loved God first, but that he loved us and gave his life as a propitiation for our sins. There's a sacrificial element to love. To love means to give of yourself, to go the extra mile, turn the other cheek. And Jesus is the best example, but he's not just an example. Jesus gives us grace to live our lives that way. It is by God's grace that we turn the other cheek. It is by God's grace that we go the extra mile. The Boy Scouts have a motto, do a good turn daily. And this can turn into even more as you give yourself to others. I was reading Boys Life magazine, which is the Boy Scout magazine, and it listed several examples of boys who had saved other people's lives. I read about some boys who saved their friends from an oncoming car, pushing them out of the way, and a whole troop of boys who were swimming in the river and saw a baby who had fallen into the river in Nebraska, and how the troop all held hands and rescued the baby from the torrent. I remember we had two in our troop who got the life-saving award for saving their families and their friends. Perhaps you read about the active shooter in Houston on May 30th of 2016. He was an upset soldier who went into Houston, and he killed one person and wounded 6 others. Maybe what you didn't hear is about the Boy Scout who saved somebody's life that day. 17-year-old Nicholas Ladiolas was going to a doctor's appointment that day when this is a very upgraded neighborhood in Houston. And he was just going to the doctor, and he saw a man screaming in pain and holding his leg, asking for help. Nicholas told a bystander to call 911. He ran to the man, put his belt around his leg as a tourniquet, applied pressure, and waited for the ambulance to come. It was only after he had begun applying the tourniquet that he realized the shooter was still shooting. But he still stayed with the man and helped him. Nick said, in Boy Scouts, they always talk about helping others and serving the community because that's what you do as a good citizen. I just knew that I could help him So I did. Nick was honored last Sunday in his Troop 642 in Houston, at Memorial Drive Presbyterian Church, which is one of our sister churches in the Fellowship of Presbyterians. Memorial Drive, they gave Nick the life-saving award. I believe as we teach people the good news of Jesus Christ, it means going the extra mile, risking yourself, doing a good turn. And as we teach them the ethics of the Sermon on the Mount, it may or may not save lives, but it'll make the world a better place. Jesus was the one who risked his life, who went the extra mile for us, who turned the cheek when we sinned against him, who loved us so much that he gave himself. And we're invited to follow his example. Amen. So we all are called to bring an offering to God as a part of our worship. I invite you to do that. Jesus said, freely you have received, therefore freely give.